Great. So I'm going to begin talking about who we're working with, both our veteran clients as well as the VA and that administrative structure. Why we've decided to focus our resources not just on working with veterans, but in this particular substantive issue area of law, and then the how, the nuts and bolts of how we advocate for the veterans that we work with. So just a brief overview of the veterans population here in the United States. There's 22.6 million veterans here, and the number of women veterans in the U.S. is about 2 million. And then, as you can see, it breaks down based on the era that the veterans served in. Right now, as of right now at least, the Vietnam War era still has the largest number of veterans, but as you, I'm sure, might not be surprised, the Gulf War era, which is 1990 until now, is continuing to get larger and larger as we have more and more active duty service members either retiring or discharging from the armed forces and joining the veterans community. So as our project, I think, makes clear at Inner City Law Center, we don't just work with veterans, we work with homeless and low-income veterans, and oftentimes veterans that are both chronically homeless and dealing with pretty severe kind of mental and physical health issues. So here's the HUD's, the Housing and Urban Development Department's definition of homelessness. I'm not going to read it out, but I'll give you a minute just to breeze through it here. As you can see, kind of from the definition, homeless, both for HUD and I think in reality, can mean a lot of very different things. I think when we think of homelessness, initially we think of folks that are very literally living on the streets of Los Angeles, and that's true. However, there's a lot of people that are more unstably housed, whether they're living in a shelter, living in their cars, couch surfing, kind of bouncing between friends and families' houses. All of these people, veteran or not, would qualify under this definition of homelessness. And I want to at this point, give you kind of an insight and an idea into the folks that you'll be serving and kind of how we meet and retain and kind of work with the veteran clients that we do. We use a shelter intake model for the most part. We as a staff, go out to various veteran shelters throughout Los Angeles and get our veteran clients from there. We work with a shelter in Hollywood that caters specifically towards and houses specifically veterans, typically recent male veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, so OIF and OEF. We work with a women's shelter down in Long Beach. It's the U.S. Veterans Shelter down there that works exclusively with women veterans. We also have a couple clinics that are known as medical legal partnerships, both here on the West Los Angeles VA campus, as well as a new one that we're actually starting down in Long Beach at the women's clinic there, that work hand in hand with VA treatment teams, catering obviously to homeless veterans that are in primary care in those clinics, and then providing our legal services as more of a holistic wraparound care model with primary care, social work, housing services, and so on and so forth. So some of the veterans that you guys will be working with today and moving forward are coming from one of those clinics or another. And we find, especially in a city like Los Angeles that's large and where the resources are a bit scattered and difficult to get to, it makes sense, especially in the context of working with homeless veterans, to be able to go to where they're at and be able to provide them our services in a way that removes as many obstacles as we can to being able to do that and to do that effectively. So again, a more general overview of the homeless veterans population in the United States. In 2012, the VA and HUD estimated that there were approximately 62,000 homeless veterans, and at the time, approximately 25% of those lived in California, with a significant percentage, I believe at that time it was about 11,000 living in Los Angeles County alone. The good news is that number's down fairly significantly. Obviously, there's still too many homeless veterans. Any would be too many, but the number has gone down quite a bit from 2012 to 2015. A lot of that has to do with allocation of both housing services as well as social and supportive services from the government to provide supportive housing for our vets. However, there's still quite a few people, especially here in the city of Los Angeles, that need our help. And because this number is going down, it means that the folks that we're seeing in the population of veterans that we're working with has changed. Not in any sort of really, I guess, overhauled way, but in some perceptibly different ways. Any ideas kind of what this decrease in homelessness would mean for us and for you guys as you start to work with veterans in this community that are still homeless? Well, I can I can tell you, or at least kind of what we've seen. It means that the folks that we're working with, they tend to be more chronically homeless, which means that they've either been homeless for over a year or have experienced 4 more periods of homelessness within the last 5 years. It means that the veterans that we're working with tend to be dealing with more severe mental health issues and more severe physical health issues. And it also means that we're oftentimes working with folks that, for very good reasons most of the time, have been historically unwilling or unable to engage in whether it's VA treatment or social support or legal services to begin with. They've been disenfranchised by the system that was supposed to help them, or unfortunately flat out ignored. And so it's our job now, as these numbers get lower and as the people that we're working with get harder to reach, to kind of redouble our efforts, knowing that the folks that we're working with now, even more so than in 2012 or before, are typically the folks that need the services that we can provide the most. So again, a brief overview of what the, oh yeah, absolutely.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The decrease, has that been in California as well? Have you seen it kind of even spread throughout the country, or more so here or less so here?
It has. Actually, in California, in Los Angeles specifically, the decrease has been even more marked than the rest of the country. Over 8,000, so I had the number a little high. Over 8,000 in 2011, down to 2,700 in 2015, and 1,600 in 2016. So, a lot of that reduction, as I was saying earlier, is attributed to more and more dollars and services going to help both get veterans into subsidized and supportive housing and keep them there. And so that means that we're doing a good job here. There's a lot a lot more that we need to do, but even more so in Los Angeles, the folks that we're still working with, are the veterans that have been traditionally the most difficult to reach, and again, like I said, I can't emphasize this enough, the people that can really benefit from the services that we provide the most. So a couple reasons why Los Angeles has so many, both veterans in general as well as homeless veterans. There's a large number of bases in California, in Los Angeles in particular, and in the kind of greater LA, San Diego, Southern California area. There's a lot of recruitment that happens here, and unfortunately in a city like Los Angeles, with rent going up and the affordable housing stock not matching that, there's a lack of both permanent supportive housing and and frankly affordable housing for low income, fixed income people. And I mentioned this earlier, I kind of alluded to it, but in Los Angeles there's difficulty when it comes to accessing resources and treatment. There are a lot of services here, both for homeless veterans as well as kind of homeless and low-income people, but it's a patchwork of resources, and it's a city that's difficult to navigate, especially for folks that don't have stable housing or a stable income. So that kind of overview of the veterans population was really the first half of the who that we're going to be working with. The second half of the who that we're going to be working with is the VA, or the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's the second largest of 15 cabinet level departments. Does anybody have any guesses as to what the biggest is?
That's good.
You got it, yeah. So it kind of makes sense. One hand shakes the other. The defense is huge budget, lots of staff, lots of active duty military members that turn into lots of veterans. And so you're dealing with not just any old administrative bureaucracy, but a large one, and unfortunately at times a fairly unwieldy one, especially for the folks that we're working with who don't necessarily have a legal background or a law degree to help them navigate that system. There's actually two different agencies under the Department of Veterans Affairs. There's the Veterans Health Administration, or the VHA. So that's, the West Los Angeles VA campus, which is right here on Wilshire. It's the VA Outpatient Care Center downtown, and it's really any sort of VA treatment facility that you may have been to or seen. As the slide indicates, that makes up a vast majority of VA personnel. That being said, the work that we're doing when it comes to benefits advocacy is going to be happening squarely within the Veterans Benefits Administration, or the VBA. So that's really the kind of administrative arm of the VA. It's where not just disability benefits, but housing and a lot of other VA benefits are kind of handled through. Important to note here that we don't really make this distinction when we're talking with our clients. They call everything the VA, and it's frankly easier for us to do that too. But I think it's important to kind of understand that here, because that distinction may be helpful not only for you to know, but to kind of explain to your clients who don't necessarily understand, at least initially, why, for example, they may have been diagnosed with PTSD by their VA treating doctor, but that doesn't necessarily, although it'd be nice if it did, simply translate into disability compensation benefits with the VBA. So just an example, but we'll get into the differences here a little bit more later. Again, so the VBA, just unpacking this a little more, there are 54 different regional offices. Fortunately for us, the closest one is here in Los Angeles. It's actually on Wilshire Boulevard. It's right across the street from the big VA Medical Center campus at the West LA, in West Los Angeles. So any hearings that you'll be doing, whether it's even at the administrative level, like as an initial appeal, or upper level hearings would be via video conference, and we'll talk more about that in a bit, but they would all be held at this LA office on Wilshire. Okay, so that was the who. Now the why. Why do we do this work? And then more specifically, why have we as a homeless veterans project at Inner City decided to focus on, among other things, but focus primarily on VA benefits? The reality is that, I believe, and I think we believe, that a stable income, which most of the folks that we work with unfortunately don't have, is a key building block, really, to being able to obtain and maintain stability in other aspects of life, whether that's housing, access to health care, access to vocational rehabilitation services, school, and we want to be able to provide that, that pathway to being able to get that stable income, and also being able to help veterans get compensation very simply for disabilities that they incurred during their time in service. In a perfect world, this system would work smoothly. It would be easy to understand, and veterans who were injured during their time in service, like the folks that you guys are going to be working with, would be able to get those benefits without needing any sort of special legal knowledge or help from an attorney. Unfortunately, that's not the case. As the slide says, veterans do not always receive what they are lawfully entitled to, and women veterans in particular, especially women veterans who have been in combat or have been deployed, traditionally have found it very difficult to get benefits because their paperwork might not immediately show the disabilities that they incurred or the traumas that they experienced in service. Melissa's going to talk in quite a bit greater detail about working with women veterans, so I'll leave that there.
Why would women veterans' paperwork not be at the same level as their male counterparts' paperwork?
So up until really recently, there were certain MOSs, or military occupational specialties, that were reserved only for men, and these were typically MOSs that were focused on more traditional kind of combat roles. As we've seen in especially kind of our most recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, traditional combat isn't really a thing in the way that it was in Vietnam or prior wars where there was a front line and then there was everybody else. I mean, we're looking at more of a total war, unfortunately. So this could be both women and men, but somebody that has an MOS maybe of a cook or a postal carrier or a truck driver, might have been exposed to, a lot of the same traumas and a lot of the same combat that, an infantryman would be, or, somebody that had a more traditional combat MOS. but their records, at least at first glance, aren't necessarily going to show a combat action badge or a Purple Heart or things like this. That by itself shouldn't and isn't sufficient to deny somebody like that benefits. However, the system, like I said, doesn't work perfectly, and it's a lot, unfortunately, easier for what they experience to kind of get lost in the shuffle without our being able to support them and, I guess, shine a light on it for the VA. So again, a little bit more about why we do this. We're representing veterans who have applied for benefits before and have been wrongly denied. So that can look a variety of different ways. That can be a traditional appeal. It can be reopening a case that got denied years ago. Again, we'll go into the procedure later. But we are working with folks that, for a variety of different reasons, have had difficulty accessing and obtaining the benefits that they're entitled to. There's also some, pretty significant and I think eye-opening data about, what representation by an attorney means in this VA process. Veterans with representation and disability compensation claims are generally expected to receive 2.4 times as much compensation and also significantly more likely to be successful in the first place. The caveat being that some of this data is a bit old. They're doing kind of a more comprehensive assessment of this now with new data expected. This data also is for veterans in general. This doesn't reflect success or amount of benefit obtained for veterans that are homeless or low income or otherwise vulnerable. So I think it's safe to say, and I'm confident in asserting this, that folks that don't have the stability to kind of tackle this process head on can be benefited even more by the services that we can provide and kind of the guidance and the path to success that I think our work can open for them. And again, the why. Life-changing results really for the folks that we work with. A veteran who is ultimately service-connected at 100%, and we'll go into what that means a little bit later too, can receive up to $34,000 a year in tax-free benefits, more if they have a spouse or dependent children. They also can receive access to some of that subsidized housing that I was talking about earlier. And they also get better access and increased access to the health care that's provided through the VA. There's also a sense, and I don't think, although this last one can't really be monetized, I think that it can't be understated how important for a lot of the folks we work with, the recognition that they did incur injuries, disabilities in service, and that the government has acknowledged them and acknowledged their hurt and what's going on in their struggle and are compensating them as they should be entitled to, for that sacrifice that they made for our country. I mentioned this earlier, and I think that it bears repeating. This income is huge. It's not just an extra, kind of bonus for the folks that we're working with. It really means the ability to potentially have a stable apartment for the first time. And with a stable apartment can come a variety of different things. I work in the medical legal partnership that I was talking about earlier at the West LA VA, and I can't tell you how many times I see somebody that might come in to the VA, is receiving general relief here in Los Angeles, which is $221 a month, which obviously can't get you anywhere. And then we're helping them kind of navigate this VA process. At the beginning, oftentimes it's very hard to connect with these people, not through any fault of their own, but because when you're homeless and when you're on $221 a month, things like making sure you make it to your appointment with your lawyer, by necessity take a back seat to making sure you have a place to sleep, making sure you have food, and making sure you're safe. And so, on initial kind of meetings and interactions with these folks, they may be missing appointments. It may be hard to get them in to see their psychologist, or a variety of different things. But when this money comes through, and I'm lucky enough to be able to work in this clinic where even though I may not be representing them anymore, I can still see them when they come in to see their doctor or see their psychologist or their social worker. Things change. They really do. They're there for their appointments. They're happier. They're engaged. They're just generally more satisfied and more capable of handling what it means to get their life back on track. And that's not just doctor's appointments. That's going back to school. That's engaging in vocational rehabilitation. But I think the vast majority of the time, getting them this income that will stabilize their life is the first step in that path, whatever that path to stability might be for them. This is kind of a breakdown of what monthly compensation through the VA can look like. We'll talk a little bit more again later about what these percentages mean. I think it's helpful to just understand generally right now that a veteran can be rated for a service-connected disability anywhere from 10% to 100% based on the VA's determination of how disabling that condition is. So you might work with a veteran who has a knee injury from service that is still bothering them, and they might get rated at 10 or 20% for that knee injury. That same veteran, though, might have a traumatic brain injury from service that really impairs their cognitive abilities or their mental health, and they might get rated at 80, 90, or 100% for that. So we'll dive into the nuts and bolts of that in a little bit, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of kind of what that looks like here. Okay, I'm going to switch over to Melissa to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how we work with our client.